Please welcome our next-gen leaders. Okay, so to start with, I'd love for you to each just give a 10-second introduction of who you are and what you work on.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Eiman Azim. I am an assistant professor at the Salk Institute, and we study motor control, in particular how the brain and spinal cord control dexterous movements.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Garrison. I'm an assistant professor at the Buck Institute for Research on Aging and UCSF. And my lab studies how neuromodulators encode flexibility in the nervous system.
I'm Mike Halassa. I'm an assistant professor. I just recently moved to MIT, and my lab studies cognition and the role of the thalamus in and its interactions with the cortex in cognitive function.
Hi, my name is Evan Macosko. I'm an assistant professor at Harvard Med School and the Broad Institute, and my lab studies and develops new technologies for genomic technologies for studying the human brain.
Hi, I'm Lucy Palmer at the Florey Institute in Melbourne, Australia, and my lab studies dendritic integration and the neural activity underlying sensory processing and behavior.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Yartsev. I'm an assistant professor at UC Berkeley, and my lab studies the neural mechanism of spatial navigation and vocal learning and acoustic communication utilizing bats, Egyptian fruit bats specifically.
Okay, thank you and welcome. So I wanted to just start out with a broad question related to I guess where you started when you came in as a next-gen leader for the Allen Institute for Brain Science and where you are now. So it's been 3 years, and each of you has had this pivotal time in your research careers in setting up your own labs or really digging deep into some of your own independent research. And I was wondering, from your perspectives, how has your position as a next-gen leader here at the Allen Institute influenced that part of your career? You know, what have you taken from it? What have you seen, maybe some of the insights that have shaped your own perspective in your research careers? And maybe we could just start with the folks holding the microphone, starting maybe with you, Michael. Well, wait, you're both Michaels. That's terrible. So
All right. Okay. So I think, you know, this experience has been great. As young investigators, we get a lot of community support. So we get a lot of these you know, awards and invitations to participate in different groups as young investigators. But this opportunity is quite unique in 2 different ways. The first is that is the cohesion. So there's a particular theme that you know, gets everybody involved around circuits and thinking about circuits. So there's molecular people, computational people, systems people, all sort of in a cohesive framework thinking about circuits. And the second thing is being able to watch what I call Clash of the Titans. So this idea that we get first-hand experience looking at senior people in the field, you know, interact around board meetings and how they manage, you know, arguments and disagreements and that sort of stuff. So that's pretty cool for a junior person.
great,
too.
yeah. So Michael, some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I think so I began as a next-gen leader right before starting my lab at Berkeley, about half a year before. And so, you know, as a new PI, a lot of the things you think about often is how do you structure projects, how do you allocate resources, how do you think of what direction the lab is going to be going at, risk-taking, you know, risk-averse, risk-taking, and so on. And so I think this is something that many young scientists, PhD, postdocs, are not trained for, right? We're trained to do good science, to do a particular project or a couple of projects during a particular phase of our career, but it's kind of more of a large-scale management is something that is not really taught. And I think coming here, of course, this is a gigantically larger scale than what my lab or any of our lab does, but still kind of this way of thinking about how do you structure things, how do you allocate resources, how do you really kind of disentangle important questions from not important questions and set a clear path? I think that was very informative, and that's something that I saw in many of the discussions about, kind of discussions we have here after this meeting, discussions at the kind of the more senior advisory board. There's a lot of that discussion, so I think this is something which, if you look at distribution of people and also the people now in the new next generation leader, it's all over the place. So it's not just mouse or visual cortex, so it's many disciplines, and I think this for me is a very good theme that many young faculty or young people can take away and think about very carefully when they're also structuring the lab. So that's for me was the most beneficial one.
Jennifer, do you have some thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so I totally agree with both of them. But for me, coming from a more molecular background, being a next-gen leader has really influenced the way that I think about science and how I'm approaching my research. And so, we're taking approaches and tackling questions now that I probably wouldn't have had I not had this experience. And related to what you said just a minute ago, I feel like now an ambassador for the Allen Institute. So the first year I came, I really didn't understand what you guys were doing, and through the 3 years that we've been coming here now, not only do I understand what you're doing, but I appreciate how what you're doing is absolutely unique in that taking a large team science approach to the brain is something that no one else can do. So I feel now like an ambassador for teaching people about the resources that you have available that maybe they don't know about. That's great. So.
Lucy.
Yeah, I echo what everyone said here. It's been an amazing experience. And in addition to what everybody said, I've also learnt how to manage my lab and what have you, but also not to be afraid to ask the big questions, because you guys are asking big questions and you're not afraid to, and that's something that that I've really taken home, is that to really step outside of the box and to really think about what you're doing at all levels, because you guys kind of you do address the all levels, and my lab we personally can't look at all the different levels, but that's not to say that that I'm not thinking about and what have you. So that's something that's really changed in the sense that I'm able to really think bigger.
That's great. Eiman.
Yeah, I want to echo what Lucy said. I want to thank everybody. It's really been inspiring to come get to visit and see how you tackle these big questions. There's a fearlessness in what you guys are doing, but there's also this really systematic way of approaching things, which has really influenced the way I think about projects that I'm undertaking in my lab, of course, at a much smaller scale. But I mean, we watch over 3 years these big ideas turn into these systematic approaches of how you standardize behavioral training. I mean, this pipeline that we saw this morning is amazing. And Sean and I were in grad school together, and so we've been talking every time I visit, and I just am inspired by how a lot of these ideas that come up can really be executed, and each step can be undertaken. Every quality control step, you see the posters where there's somebody dedicated to the task of making sure that it's done in a systematic and standardized way. And that's a pretty inspiring thing to see.
Evan.
Well, as the last person, I'd say that most of the things I was going to say have already been, so I'd echo most of the things people have said, but one other thing I wanted to just highlight that I've really taken away is I think I've always been a person who's been very much in favor of open science. It's just kind of part of my personality, and so I certainly resonated with me, what you guys are doing, but I think there's a difference between just sort of wanting to do that and doing it in the right way, and I think I've learned a lot from you guys about how to put your data out there in a way that's presentable but also interactable with the community, to think about ways that, for example, in my work, developing new technologies, how those technologies can be transferred to other groups in ways that are sort of easily accessible. Just a lot of different details in conversations with many people here about how that happens, and I've definitely taken a lot of that away from the experience.
Great. So in the interest of getting plenty of time in for questions from the audience, I was wondering if anybody already has a question for any one or all of our next-gen leaders. If not, I still have some more questions for them too. But I wanted to open it up to see if there are people that have specific questions about their experiences or their insights in this role. Just raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone. If not, I actually had a question again focused on some of the open science aspect of this. So we're very committed to opening up our data. We certainly know that in this community now, this is a critical way of leveraging the skills and insights and capabilities of people with diverse backgrounds. And we also know that here at the Allen Institute, since it's very much baked into our culture, we build a system around that. We know that that system is not always recapitulated at different academic organizations, universities, or some of the spaces where you work. And so I was just wondering about your perspectives on how do you facilitate, how do you walk the walk of open science where sometimes the constraints or the realities might not be shared by the individual organizations that you're in. Maybe Evan, you can speak to this because you'd mentioned how this was relevant to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think one particular element that I've learned is because the Allen is putting out such multidisciplinary data sets, and presumably those data sets are going to be accessed not only by experts in that specific subfield, like in the case of molecular data, it's not just going to be by people like me who really know that data format well, but hopefully neuroscientists of other ilks who would want to interact with it. That open science isn't just about, kind of regurgitating data on a server and having people download it. It also has to be interactable in some way and accessible to people of many different skill sets and knowledge bases. And so that's something in particular that I think is quite admirable about what you guys have done, is to really think about the end users and how they interact with the data. And so that's something I also think a lot about, is just sort of how data is going to get out there and how it's going to actually be used.
Yeah, I'll agree with that, and I think it's these paradigm shifts in how science is done. You often need a leader who can do it at scale, somebody big, not just one lab leading the shift to open science. And I think Allen Institute's really taken on that role of showing how it can be done. And now you see, NIH really promoting these consortiums, these U19 grants, this team approach to science. And so by setting the example for everybody else, I think that the field will continue to not only share resources and protocols, but share data openly. Of course, there's still allocation of credit, which everybody has to worry about, and so it'll be interesting to see how everything develops in academia, but I think Allen Institute's really set a good standard.
So what are your thoughts maybe on some of the ways that can be addressed, and in your roles, particularly as people who've now seen examples of what can work, but also have challenges or see the impediments in your own universities? What are some ways that you feel like you can sort of set either leadership by example or foster that kind of collaboration through your own activities? Do any of you have experience with that or want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's working? Yes.
Yeah.
I think that, I think many people are generally agreeing with the approach of open science, but there's a few things I think, and this came up in some of the more senior meetings as well, is that we also have to be a bit cautious, right? Because there's a matter of not, as you mentioned, not just putting data out on the server somewhere, but there has to be some quality control, right? Not every data should be usable. Once there's enough data that's not great, people are discouraged from using that. So there should be some quality control. And the second thing, and I think that's something that you guys are also thinking a lot about and are still coming up with solutions for, is how do you make that data not only that people are aware that the research data somewhere on the server, but they will know exactly what it is and how to use it, how they can approach it. And that's something which is not trivial. And I think one of the things I learned from here is that this definitely cannot be done at the level of, even if there's many small labs highly motivated to do it, there needs to be someone, some organization, somebody, some support that's going to unify all of this in a very clear way. So I think before we have something as clear as that, it's going to be difficult. But this is something that organizations like Allen, and others can basically take the lead on, and already have taken the lead and kind of began showing the way of how this can be implemented very effectively.
So one way to implement open science is to share methods and share ways of doing things. And I know, the Allen Institute does a lot of workshops and that sort of stuff. And so, a former NGL, member, Viviana Granaro, for example, she runs these workshops for tissue clearing and optogenetics and just teaching people how to do various things. So that's one example. In my lab, we try to run these classes for various things that we do, like microelectrode fabrications, microdrive building, that sort of stuff. But again, it would be nice potentially to have a centralized way of advertising these things, maybe through the Allen, as current and former NGLs. We could potentially partner up and just advertise these things and do that sort of stuff.
So that's an interesting point. As a community as well, we're now sort of getting a very critical mass of people who's had this experience either before or now we're just welcoming a new cohort of next-gen leaders. And is this also an opportunity that you feel you've had to build or strengthen the connections within, within your own network?
Yeah.
Did anybody want to speak to that?
I mean, the answer is, I think that everyone here would say yes. I have new collaborations, but related to the last question you asked, one of the things that I've realized, so I'm in a very supportive, collaborative environment, but not every place is like that. And as a young PI, obviously, we have to kind of walk the line between sharing all of the information that we're collecting and waiting until it's published. But I've found that by connecting with like-minded young investigators and collaborating with them, that really kind of pushes forward this idea of open science and open data.
So I'm scanning the audience again, too, to see if there's a question coming through. I think Eric has one, but go ahead.
I'm curious about, curious about your perspectives about the Allen Institute resources and programs and how they're going to drive theoretical neuroscience and computational neuroscience forward. So there are a few different ways this can happen. Obviously, testing existing theories on standardized data sets, using these data in order to inspire new hypotheses that then you might test in your own labs, et cetera. But what are the ways in which you think this approach is going to be especially effective and perhaps especially ineffective in terms of driving computation and theory forward?
I don't know. Somebody was saying that you guys are coming up with a platform to standardize, spiking neural models and rate models and TensorFlow. I mean, that's a potential platform that can be. Yeah, yeah. I mean, so that's pretty amazing, and that could be a way for us to, there's this Model DB and GitHub and some of these repositories that, that just basically curate a bunch of models and puts them in one place. But I think having them integrated in a single platform where you can go back and forth between spiking neurons and rates and recurrent networks, I mean, that's a pretty ambitious goal, and I think that whatever you guys are working on in that domain would be super useful because we do both in the lab, and I think we do multiple kinds of modeling, and I think having a way to go back and forth between them and share them across different labs would be great.
Just one small follow-up to that. I mean, this has been discussed several times, I know, in the last few years, is the extent to which the Allen is able or willing to import data from academic sources and sort of keep it in some sort of curated or common database. I think that would be very powerful for a computationalist to have sort of a central repository of curated data.
Okay, are there other questions yet? It's a quiet group.
Okay, so what's it like out there? What's your general feeling in terms of? I mean, you're all starting out as young faculty. Excitement, concern. What's it like?
Exciting and concerning.
Here, get to.
I mean, I think like anybody embarking on something like as big of a shift of going from a postdoc to starting a lab is both full of concern and full of excitement. All of a sudden, you have much more responsibility and things are put on your plate that you weren't necessarily trained to do. So, but that's not a new problem. That's just something that everybody who's open a lab faces. But I think it's an exciting time to be an assistant professor in academia right now because it's sort of echoing what we were saying earlier. There is a shift that's happening gradually in science towards more open science, more collaborative science. Just like was mentioned earlier, I'm also in a very collaborative environment at the Salk Institute, and it's something that I feel is every year and every new group of assistant professors that comes in is going to be more and more of a trend where no one lab can be expert at everything, and you have to tackle most big neuroscience questions at multiple levels of analysis. And so there's a lot of willingness now for experts to come and meet in the middle. And so I think it's a really exciting time to not only be in academia, but to be at the interface between academia and places like the Allen Institute and other big endeavors.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time, particularly to be a junior faculty in the neurosciences, right? I think that the tools that we have available and the sorts of questions that we can answer, even just from 5 years ago, is just exponentially more exciting and bigger. But it is, it is challenging. There's a laundry list of things that all junior investigators have to tackle. But I think we're all in a very good position in terms of the resources that we have and the things that that we're able to access, especially with respect to our relationship with you guys.
I think it's incredible right now, right? It's like this, I'm surprised. Like just cannot believe somebody's actually paying me to do this. It's amazing, really, that you get to. You move from like a PhD postdoc where you always had a mentor that you had to work with and answer to, and now maybe in a few years we'll be in a position where we do have to answer to. When we apply for like serious IR1, you have to really kind of be very focused on the disease that you want to solve, or be very like more, I guess, more mainstream potentially at some point to get funding. But right now, we have all of us, right? You have the money, you have the freedom, you have the ideas, you have amazing people working with you. And, I just cannot believe that there's a job like this that exists for this period of time, and I just want to see how long it lasts. I think it's incredible. Yeah.
I can piggyback on that last point that Michael mentioned, which is, one pretty amazing thing about the Allen Institute is this example of focus, so that there is, at the end of this, there's going to be a product. The product is we're going to understand how a sensory motor transformation works, how object recognition could work. This focus is actually really helpful for young PIs, because focus is what's rewarded in science. When you start your lab, you have all these resources and too many things, or too many potential opportunities, and I think one of the biggest challenges is recognizing where to focus and where to put the right bets on, and not to be lured by many shiny objects, and just put some blinders on and just focus on one or a couple of problems to be able to solve and make progress. So the Allen has been really useful for leading by example.
Lucy, did you have any comments?
Oh, I echo what everyone says, but it is certainly an exciting time to be starting a lab. But yeah, it's something I said. Being able to kind of focus and have your interest and kind of continue that, but you can actually start asking all these questions that you've dreamed of asking all throughout your postdoc. But your postdoc, you really do focus on one question, but all of a sudden you can start diving down these paths that you didn't realize that you could, and start new collaborations, and science just takes you in places that you didn't think that you'd be going. So it's really an exciting time. But you also do have to constrain yourself at some point.
Okay, there's a question up top there.
Hi, you're all going to be, or probably already are, peer reviewers and also grant reviewers, and you'll be showing up on study section soon. And I have a question, a more difficult kind of question, about the relationship between big data and the peer review and the grant review process. I study an obscure part of the brain, never mind what it is, but I just read two papers published in Nature Cell type journals, one of which said that there's an important receptor that's expressed in the part of the brain that I study. And I went to the Allen Atlas, and it just isn't expressed there. And you can say, well, the Allen database isn't always right. There's some false negatives and things, but it's expressed beautifully in all the other parts of the brain where it's known to be expressed, and it simply isn't expressed in the nucleus that this paper says, is in their model. And another paper very close to my field that says a certain part of the brain projects to this area of the brain that I study, and there are 3 perfect cases in the Allen Connectivity Atlas that in 3 different Cree drivers that put a tracer in exactly that spot. And there's nothing, no fibers, not even one fiber going to this area that this paper is published about. And so there is clearly a disconnect between what's going on at the peer review level and the data that are available in these repositories, and they were available at the time these papers were accepted. And I wonder if you've seen anything like that in your work. I've seen the same problem in grants that I review, where there's this disconnect where either the reviewer or the author has not made effective use of the available data. And so I see this as a breakdown in the peer review and editorial process. And I wonder if you've seen this in some cases and how we as a field should approach this.
I think that's a really terrific question and obviously a very, very tough one. I think there's two things to say. I mean, I do keep that in mind a lot. I mean, a lot of the papers that I review now are very much big data papers, and there's an additional struggle, not only that people may not have been accessing existing data to validate or understand their results, but also they may not actually be depositing their data for review, and that's a big question, is like how much of the analysis should be made available for reviewers. I think more than what is now, so that people can feel like they can replicate the results if we're going to continue with a peer review process. But I also think, as has been discussed in a variety of scientific circles, I think it is worth reevaluating the extent to which post-publication review is a part of the academic process, because inevitably, if you just get 2 or 3, experts, no matter how expert they are, these are very interdisciplinary papers. There's many different kinds of data modalities that are a part of these studies. You're going to need to kind of import the expertise of many more than just 2 or 3 people. And I see that also routinely in peer review processes where, I feel like I can do my part, but I'm kind of concerned about another part. But, is there actually an expert who's really able to evaluate that component? I think that's a very difficult part of this process as well.
Okay, I think there's another question up toward the top.
So you just commented on the importance of availability of data, which I totally agree with. What do we do if the data is so large that it costs $1 million a month to host it?
Well, then the Allen Institute has to host it.
Uh-huh.
Well, I don't. I'm holding the microphone. I guess I have to. I don't know. I think I've never had to deal with this particularly expensive problem, but I think if you do have such a huge amount of data that you're analyzing and you're hoping that it's going to provide some guidance to the community, I think you have to be thinking practically about how you're going to be hosting that or distributing that. I mean, it seems otherwise, there's just no way of the community interacting with that result. So, that's a short way of replying.
If I could just add, I think what, ways of linking those two questions would be awareness. The awareness of the key elements right now in the scientific field, which include resource management and data availability. So it sounds like some of the opportunities just in terms of awareness of what's out there, how to use it, and then practical matters of what are some of the costs or constraints, either with open data or, literally the price tag associated with what it costs to make data open. A lot of the open access journals have been tackling this lately with being a little bit more transparent about the fact that authors then have to foot the cost of open data if that is not being covered through some sort of other kind of access point through some sort of subscription. So, we have a few more minutes, maybe 5 more minutes. Are there more questions right now from the audience? Because if not, I was wondering, is there one up there? Okay, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we've been talking a lot about the communication between scientists and people within the field, and I have a broader question because I keep seeing this growing divide between the general population and the scientific field at large, and I think this is particularly true in the neuroscience field. And this is going to be a really large issue when we talk about policy, voting structures, and funding, let's be honest. So how do you think we can close this and also reach out to influence the education to bring up that next generation of leaders? Because up through high school, they won't have a clue what we're doing at this level. Up through college, maybe. And I see this divide only growing.
I think a really important aspect there, and it's somewhat of a link to what we were just talking about with access to big data. I think generally all of us as scientists have to get much better at communicating complicated ideas to the public, and a lot of this is visualization. And so I'm not dealing with the big data question. I'm not sure whether the best approach is by default to make all raw data from everything, not just coming out of the Allen Institute, but every place, just put it all online. It's going to be a deluge that scientists don't know how to deal with and won't know how to articulate to the public in concise ways. And so to link two somewhat unrelated questions, I think it's our job not only to produce the data and make it available to each other and to analyze it correctly and carefully, but to think hard about how to summarize it and make it visually communicable to the general public. And I think that's really what would appeal to people coming up through high school and then college and deciding to go into research. It's not just knowing that there's big data out there, but being able to relate to it and see what it really means.
So one potential answer to your question and data and one idea that's been on my mind recently is that we need more theory. We need to invest in theory. We need a way in order to sort of condense all this data out there into something that's, simple and understandable. And I think from my perspective, in my own work, the limiting factors are not tools, are not data. It's really just the absence of a theoretical framework that makes sense, right? And I think that now with the growth of AI and some of the statistical approaches to just understanding the big data, we just need a concise theoretical framework that tells us what it is that the brain does and what neural circuits do. So I think both on the research end and on the educational end, I think if there was more of that computational training in neuroscience, I think people would make more sense of what the brain actually does and sort of communicate it better.
Other thoughts?
I'll just say also, practically speaking, what do people care about? Things that improve their lives or affect them, disease. So, I think we also have to think about, always as we're doing our science, it's hard, but to think about the extent to which we can also meet people where they are and not just have people meet us somewhere.
Yeah, and I also think actually, we've got to improve our communication skills, but also really think about what our research actually means. Like, we're asking these, well, you guys are asking, big questions, but we're generally just asking a very small little question. But we have to always think and probably actually start talking about what it means as to, how the brain works or how we function as humans or what we do, how we see or something. So I think that's something that would help us, to communicate to the, general public as to, the importance of what we do, that we're not just looking at one cell type or one gene or what have you, but we're really trying to understand how how we function, how the brain works. So I think that would help.
Yeah. I would say actually, I think that's a very important point, both the education and the peer review, both in papers and in grants. And so I think, unfortunately, actually, we're going into an era where this idea of spreading the science to the general public at the level of education is actually becoming discouraged. So oftentimes it's actually linked to a specific disease, and we talk about this like almost every time scientists get together. They talk about how when they submit grants, they're forced to basically put something which is disease relevant, even if it's not what they're actually doing, right? And that's becoming a big problem. And so other organizations which foster just the spread of basic science, like NSF, for example, are getting really underfunded, and they don't get the money they need, to support people spreading the science. I think I don't know if there's a solution. Right now, it's actually going in the opposite direction. I agree with you. That's going to become a problem, because I actually disagree that people only care about disease. Most people, if you look at psychology, most people don't care about disease until they're ill or have somebody who's ill in their family. They kind of discourage it and assume it's not going to happen to me. But people generally very much are appreciative of basic science and just interesting stuff. And we are slowly shrinking in how we spread that thing out to the public, and that's a problem. On the peer review, I would say, I don't know what papers you're referring to, but I would say, if anything, this is a great thing, right? That's a great thing about science. If a paper is a Nature Cell, it doesn't really matter. In the long term, 30, 40 years down the road, I don't think it matters in any way for the actual scientific progress. But the discrepancy between a potential observation and some existing data, that's what's actually going to drive and push forward science. I personally think it's only positive. But I agree, people should somehow find a way of following up on that, maybe, right? and just basically trying to see if you have a discrepancy, how do we utilize all the information we have available to try and understand it. But,
I was just going to add very quickly to what Michael said. I completely agree. For some reason in life sciences, it's become sort of an imperative when you're talking to the public to say, here's the disease that we're going to cure in 10 years with the thing, instead of just talking about the wonder of discovery and exploration. I think probably a lot of us grew up wanting to become an astronaut or something like that. I know I did, just because of this awe in the unknown. And I think we should be more willing to go out in the public and say, we may or may not cure anything with this project, but it's a very interesting question to understand how our brain works, and for the sake of understanding.
So let's hear from Jennifer and then Michael, and I think then that'll be our wrap-up of this session.
Related to what Mike was saying about the discrepancy in the data and the peer review and the papers that you were referring to in the back, I hope that preprint servers like BioRxiv will help to solve this problem, because if the paper is out there and available to everyone to look at before it's published, there is feedback and commentary, and hopefully people take those comments and then improve the manuscript, before it's published. So it can only get better, right, from having it out in the public space.
Yeah. So just Evan and I are both psychiatrists. He's more of a psychiatrist. Well, I guess you're seeing patients. That's what I'm. And I just want to make a point about disease. So it's really important to solve diseases and all of that, but real serious mental illness, we don't have a framework of what goes on in these disorders. We're at a complete loss, trying to describe different behaviors, and it's sort of like trying to infer what pneumonia is without having an X-ray, right? Just based on the kind of cough somebody produces or something like that. So we have no theory. We have no idea of how to go in and understand what are the kinds of computational failures people could potentially have, and how would they converge onto what we call a psychiatric diagnosis. So I think, yes, absolutely, more basic science. We just need to understand at this point in order to just know what to tell people that they have. Not that they have, more or less serotonin or whatever psychiatrists end up telling people. It's really sort of what it is that is going on computationally.
Well, that's a great ending point there.
Yeah.
So I'd like to thank our NGLs very much for their insights.